My name is Ruth, and for 23 years I had greeted each dawn the same way, with my hands already reaching for the heavy basket of soiled laundry that waited beside my narrow bed, my feet finding their familiar path through the darkness, toward the James River, where I would spend the first hours of daylight scrubbing the fine clothes and linens that belonged to Master Whitmore and his family. The work began before the sun painted the Virginia sky pink and gold, when the world was still wrapped in the cool silence that comes just before creation wakes. I preferred it this way. These stolen moments of peace when the river was mine alone, when I could pretend that the gentle current carrying away the soap and dirt was also carrying away my troubled riverside plantation stretched along the James River like a sleeping giant, its white columned mansion rising from manicured gardens, while the slave quarters huddled in neat rows behind the kitchen buildings. I had been born in one of those small cabins, raised to understand that my purpose in life was to serve the Whitmore family with quiet efficiency and grateful submission. The laundry house stood at the river's edge, a simple wooden structure with large windows that caught the morning light and wooden tubs that had been scrubbed smooth by decades of use. This was my domain, the place where I transformed stained silk and muddy cotton into pristine garments, worthy of Virginia's finest family. Ruth works magic with fabric, Mrs. Whitmore often told her guests, as if I were some kind of domestic appliance rather than the person who spent hours ensuring that her reputation for elegance remained untarnished. She can make the most delicate lace look new again, and she never damages anything, not even the children's play clothes. The praise felt hollow because it acknowledged only my usefulness, while ignoring everything else about who I was. But I had learned to accept such comments as the closest thing to recognition I was likely to receive. In a world that valued my labor while dismissing my humanity. Each morning, I would sort the laundry with practiced efficiency, separating the delicate items that required gentle hand-washing from the sturdy fabrics that could withstand more aggressive scrubbing. The fine linens went into the first tub with soap made from lye and animal fat, while everyday garments waited their turn in larger vessels. The rhythm of washing became a kind of meditation, my hands moving automatically while my mind wandered. Two places far from the Virginia countryside, I would imagine cities where people who looked like me walked freely down busy streets, schools where children learned to read regardless of the color of their skin, churches where families could worship together without fear of being separated by sale. Ruth, you dreaming again? My sister Lily would tease when she brought additional laundry from the big house. Mama used to say, dreaming was dangerous for folks like us. Makes you forget to be grateful for what you got. Lily was 3 years younger than me but infinitely more practical. She had accepted our circumstances with a resignation that both impressed and saddened me. Where I saw injustice, she saw inevitability. Where I harbored secret hopes for something better, she found contentment in small pleasures and daily routines. Maybe Mama was wrong, I would reply gently, continuing to scrub while we talked. Maybe dreaming is what keeps us human when everything else tries to turn us into property. Dangerous talk, Lily would warn, though her tone was affectionate rather than harsh. You keep thinking thoughts like that and you'll end up in trouble. But I couldn't stop thinking such thoughts. Couldn't stop wondering what lay beyond the boundaries of Riverside Plantation. Couldn't stop believing that somewhere in the wide world there had to be places where freedom was possible for people like Usta. River became my confidant during those long morning hours, its steady flow carrying away not just dirt and soap, but also my whispered prayers and secret longings. I would tell the water about my dreams of learning to read, of choosing my own work, of walking down a street without lowering my eyes when white folks passed. Take my hopes somewhere safe, I would whisper to the current, carry them to places where they might take root and grow into something real. It was during one of these solitary conversations with the river that I first noticed Samuel Davis, a free black man who occasionally did carpentry work for Master Whitmore. He would arrive early in the morning to begin repairs on fences or outbuildings, and his path to the worksite took him past the laundry house. At first I paid him little attention. Free blacks were uncommon in our area, and I had been taught to avoid drawing their notice. They existed in a precarious space between slavery and full citizenship, often viewed with suspicion by both whites and enslaved people, who wondered how they had achieved their unusual status. But Samuel was different from the few other free blacks I had encountered. He carried himself with quiet dignity rather than the desperate deference that marked most who had purchased or been granted their freedom. His clothes were simple but well made, his tools were his own rather than borrowed, and most remarkably, he met everyone's eyes with calm confidence. Morning, Miss Ruth, he would say as he passed the laundry house. touching his hat politely, but speaking as if I were a person worthy of courtesy rather than property to be acknowledged briefly. The simple greeting always made my heart race, though I couldn't have explained why. "Good morning, Mr. Samuel," I would reply quietly, keeping my attention focused on my work, while stealing glances at his face. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong hands that spoke of honest labor, and eyes that held depths I longed to explore. Our exchanges remained brief and formal for weeks, limited to polite greetings and occasional comments about the weather. But I began looking forward to those moments with an anticipation that surprised me. The sight of Samuel walking toward the laundry house became the brightest part of my dawn routine. "That free man's taken a shine to you," Lily observed one morning, after Samuel had passed. "I see how he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching." "Don't be silly," I replied, though my cheeks burned with embarrassment. "He's just being polite. That's all. Polite. Don't explain why he started taking the long way to his worksite," Lily pointed out with a knowing smile. "Or why he always seems to have something needs fixing near the laundry house." She was right, though I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. Samuel's visits had become more frequent and his excuses for passing by the river increasingly creative. Last week he had spent an entire morning repairing a fence that looked perfectly sound to my untrained eyes. "Even if he does like me," I said, voicing the fear that kept me from hoping too much, "what difference does it make? I'm not free to choose who I spend time with, and he's not foolish enough to get involved with Master Whitmore's property." "Maybe not," Lily said thoughtfully, "but free folks got connections, got ways of doing things that enslaved people don't know about. Maybe his interest in you goes beyond just wanting company." Her words planted a seed of possibility that I tried to ignore but couldn't quite dismiss. What if Samuel's attention was about more than simple attraction? What if he represented opportunities I had never dared to imagine? The question was answered on a cool morning in October, when the maple trees along the river had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. I was kneeling beside the water scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain from one of Master Whitmore's shirts when Samuel approached with a piece of wood in his hands. "Morning, Miss Ruth," he said, his voice carrying a nervousness I had never heard before. "I was wondering if you might look at this piece of timber. Tell me if you think it's sound enough for the repair work I'm planning." It was an odd request since I knew nothing about carpentry, but I set down the shirt and examined the wood he offered. As I turned it in my hands, I felt something small and crinkly pressed against the smooth surface. "Seems fine to me," I said, my heart pounding as I realized he had somehow attached a piece of paper to the wood. "Sturdy and well seasoned. Much obliged for your opinion," Samuel replied, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Sometimes it helps to get a second look at things before you commit to using them." After he left, I waited several anxious minutes before examining the paper more closely. It was a small piece of foolscap folded multiple times and secured with a tiny drop of candle wax. My hands trembled as I opened it and saw the words that would change my life forever. "Your freedom awaits." The letter began in careful handwriting. "If you are willing to trust a man who has watched you work by this river and seen the dreams in your eyes, there is a way to the north. A path that leads to places where you can choose your own work and walk with your head high." I read the words 3 times before their meaning truly sank in. Samuel was offering me escape, offering me the possibility of freedom that I had dreamed about but never believed could be real. The letter continued with specific instructions about where and when to meet if I was interested in hearing more. "The risks are real," the letter warned, "and the journey is dangerous, but the destination is worth any price if you have the courage to pay it. I will wait by the old oak tree near the bend in the river tomorrow night after the moon sets. If you come, I will explain everything. If you do not, I will understand and never speak of this again." The letter was signed simply S, but it might as well have been signed Revolution, for all the change it promised to bring to my carefully ordered world. Here was the opportunity I had prayed for but never expected to receive, offered by a man who barely knew me but who had somehow seen past my circumstances to the person trapped inside. I spent the rest of that day washing laundry in a daze, my hands performing their familiar tasks, while my mind reeled with possibilities and fears. Escape to the north, freedom to choose my own path, the chance to become more than Master Whitmore's useful property. But the letter also carried dangers that made my blood run cold. Capture could mean a beating that would leave me permanently damaged. Sail to a plantation where conditions would be infinitely worse than anything I had experienced at Riverside. or even death if I was unlucky enough to encounter the wrong slave. Catchers, you're mighty quiet today, Lily observed as we hung the finished laundry on lines strung between two sturdy posts. Something troubling you? I wanted to tell her about the letter, to share the impossible hope and terrible fear that warred in my chest, but I also understood that knowledge could be dangerous for her if my plans were discovered. Anyone who knew about them might face punishment. Just thinking about winter coming, I lied, though the deception tasted bitter on my tongue. Wondering if we'll have enough warm clothes for the cold months we always manage, Lily said with the practical optimism that defined her character. Master Whitmore sees that his people stay healthy. It's good business, good business. That was what we were to him. Investments to be maintained rather than people to be cherished. The reminder of our true status made Samuel's offer even more precious, a chance to become human rather than property, to be valued for who I was rather than what I could do that night. I lay on my narrow bed staring at the ceiling and listening to Lily's peaceful breathing, trying to imagine what it would feel like to wake up in a place where no one owned me, where my time belonged to me rather than to someone else, where I could walk wherever I wanted without asking permission. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had never made a truly independent decision in my entire life, had never faced a choice whose consequences would be entirely my own to bear. The weight of such freedom seemed almost as daunting as the prospect of remaining enslaved. But as I listened to the night sounds outside our cabin, the distant hoot of an owl and the gentle rustle of wind through the trees, I felt something settle in my chest that might have been determination. Tomorrow night I would meet Samuel by the old oak tree. I would listen to what he had to say, and I would decide whether I was brave enough to reach for the freedom that awaited me somewhere beyond the boundaries of everything I had ever known. The day that followed Samuel's letter passed with agonizing slowness, each hour stretching like thick molasses while I struggled to appear normal despite the excitement and terror coursing through my veins. I dropped a china cup while cleaning the breakfast dishes, spilled soap on myself twice during the morning wash, and found myself staring into space so often that Lily asked if I was feeling poorly. "You sure you ain't coming down with something?" she pressed as we folded the dried laundry in the late afternoon. "You've been acting strange all day, distracted and jumpy." "I'm fine," I insisted, though my hands shook as I smoothed wrinkles from one of Mrs. Whitmore's petticoats. "Just tired, I suppose. Didn't sleep well last night. Maybe you should ask Cook for some of her chamomile tea," Lily suggested, her concern evident in her gentle tone. "Helps settle the mind when worry keeps you awake." Worry was certainly keeping me awake, but not the kind that chamomile could cure. I was worried about courage, about whether I possessed enough of it to follow through on the meeting with Samuel, about what would happen to Lily if I disappeared into the night. The letter had mentioned only me, had offered freedom to one person rather than two, and I understood the practical reasons for such limitations. Moving to people was twice as dangerous as moving one, required twice as many resources and twice as much careful planning, but the thought of leaving Lily behind felt like tearing my own heart in half. She was the only family I had left in the world, the only person who shared memories of our mother and father, the only one who understood the particular blend of love and frustration that defined life at Riverside Plantation. "Lily," I said carefully as we finished our work, "if you could go anywhere in the world, anywhere at all, where would you choose?" She looked at me with surprise, as if the question itself was dangerous. "What kind of talk is that, Ruth? We both know we ain't going nowhere. This is our home and our life. But if you could," I pressed gently, "if somehow you had the choice, what would you want?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling as she considered the question. "I suppose," she said finally, "I'd want to go somewhere warm, somewhere I could have a little garden, and maybe a house with more than one room, not north." I asked, "Not to one of the free states where black folks can vote and own property? North's too cold." Lily replied with a small smile, "And too far from everything I know. I'd rather stay in Virginia and hope things get better than run off to some place where I don't understand how anything works." Her answer both relieved and saddened me. Relieved because it suggested she might not be heartbroken if I left, saddened because it revealed how completely she had accepted our limitations, how thoroughly she had convinced herself that small improvements were better than fundamental change. As darkness fell, and the plantation settled into its evening routine, I made my preparations with the careful attention of someone planning a military campaign. I changed into my darkest dress and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, slipped my few precious possessions into a small bundle that I could carry, Easily the letter from Samuel was hidden inside my bodice, pressed close to my heart where I could feel its reassuring presence. The words, "Your freedom awaits," had become a prayer that I repeated silently as I waited for the proper time to leave. A old oak tree stood near a bend in the James River about half a mile from the quarters, far enough to ensure privacy but close enough that I could return quickly if the meeting proved to be some kind of trap. The walk through the darkness required all my courage and knowledge of the plantation's geography. Had waited until well past midnight to ensure that everyone was deeply asleep. The night was moonless as Samuel had specified, with only starlight to guide my careful steps along paths I knew by touch as much as sight. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. Every shadow could hide a watcher. The oak tree was ancient and massive, its gnarled branches creating a canopy that blocked even the faint starlight. I approached it with my heart hammering so loudly I was certain it could be heard for miles, expecting at any moment to hear Samuel's voice or to discover that I had been deceived. "Miss Ruth," came a whisper from the deeper shadows near the tree's base. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted, moving closer to where Samuel's outline was barely visible. "But I had to hear what you wanted to tell me." "Sit with me," he said, settling on a fallen log that created a natural bench. "There is much to explain, and not much time to do it." I sat beside him, acutely aware of his warmth in the cool night air, of the way his presence made me feel both safer and more nervous than I had ever been in my life. "First," Samuel said quietly, "I need you to understand that what I'm offering is real, but dangerous. There are people, good people, who help slaves reach freedom in the North. But the journey requires courage and trust and the willingness to leave everything familiar behind the Underground Railroad." I said, the words barely audible. "Yes," he confirmed, "a network of conductors and safe houses that stretches from Virginia to Canada. I'm connected to that network through my work, through friends who share the belief that no person should live in bondage." "And you think," I said carefully, "that I could make such a journey?" "I don't just think it," Samuel replied with conviction. "I know it. I've watched you by that river for months, seen the strength in the way you work, the dignity in the way you carry yourself, the intelligence in your eyes that no amount of oppression has been able to extinguish." His words made my chest tight with emotion. It had been so long since anyone had spoken of me as if I possessed admirable qualities, rather than mere usefulness. "But why?" I asked. "Why would you risk yourself for someone you barely know?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried depths of feeling that made my breath catch. "Because I've fallen in love with the woman I see washing clothes by the river each morning. The woman who talks to the water like it's a friend, who finds beauty in simple things despite living in circumstances that would crush most spirits. Love." The word hung in the air between us like a promise and a confession. I had dreamed of someone speaking such words to me but had never imagined it could happen under circumstances like these. "You don't really know me," I protested weakly, though my heart was singing with joy at his declaration. "I know enough," Samuel said firmly. "I know you're kind because I've seen how gently you handle even the roughest fabrics. I know you're strong because I've watched you work from dawn to dusk without complaint. I know you're brave because you came here tonight despite the risks. And I know," he continued, moving closer so that our shoulders touched, "that you dream of something better because I can see it in your face when you think no one's watching. The hope that somehow, somewhere, there might be a different kind of life waiting." "There might be," I said quietly. "If I'm brave enough to reach for it." "The plan is this," Samuel explained, his voice becoming businesslike as he outlined the details. "Next Tuesday night, there's a wagon heading north with a load of grain. The driver is part of our network and has agreed to take one passenger hidden beneath the cargo." "One passenger," I repeated, my heart sinking as I thought of Lily. "Moving two people at once doubles the danger," Samuel said gently, clearly understanding my concern. "But once you're established in the North, once you're safe and settled, arrangements could be made for your sister if she's willing." "She's not willing," I said sadly. "I asked her today, in a roundabout way, and she's too afraid of the unknown to want freedom badly enough to fight for it." "Then you'll have to choose," Samuel said, his hand finding mine in the darkness. "Between staying here, where you're safe but enslaved, or coming north where you'll be free but separated from the only family you have left." The choice he described felt impossible. How could I abandon Lily, who had been my constant companion and closest friend for my entire life? But how could I pass up what might be my only chance for freedom? "What about you?" I asked. "If I go north, will I ever see you again?" "I travel regularly on business," Samuel replied, buying and selling goods between Virginia and Pennsylvania. If you go north, I'll find ways to visit, ways to court you properly, if you'll have me court me, I repeated, the phrase sounding strange and wonderful in the context of my life, marry you. If you'll say yes, Samuel said, his voice soft but determined. Build a life together where we can make our own choices. Raise children who'll never know what it means to be owned by someone else's marriage. Children, a life built on love rather than ownership. The possibilities he described seemed too beautiful to be real, but sitting beside him in the darkness, feeling the sincerity in his voice and the warmth of his hand holding mine, I began to believe they could be. I need time to think, I said finally, though my heart was already pulling me toward the choice I knew I would make. Tuesday night, Samuel reminded me, the wagon leaves from Miller's Crossroads at midnight. If you decide to go, meet me there with whatever you can carry in a small bundle. If you don't come, I'll understand and respect your decision. And if I do come, I asked, what then? Then we start a new life together, Samuel said simply. We become free people choosing to love each other. And we prove that some dreams are worth any risk. He walked me back part way to the quarters, stopping where the path became visible from the slave cabins. Before we parted, he pulled something from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. What is this? I asked, feeling the small, hard object in my palm. A button, Samuel replied, carved from bone. My mother made it for me before she died. Said it would bring good luck to whoever carried it. I can't take something so precious. I protested. You can if you're going to be my wife, Samuel said with a smile I could hear in his voice. Besides, I want you to have something to remember me by while you're deciding. I don't need anything to remember you, I said softly. You're already carved into my heart, deeper than any button could be carved from bone. Samuel's breath caught at my words, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me, but instead he squeezed my hand gently and stepped back into the shadows. Tuesday night. He reminded me, if you have the courage to reach for the freedom that awaits. I made my way back to the cabin, in a daze, my mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Lily was still sleeping peacefully when I slipped back into bed, her breathing deep and regular, unaware that her sister had just been offered everything she had ever dreamed of. I lay awake until dawn, turning Samuel's button over and over in my hands, feeling its smooth surface and thinking about the choice that would define the rest of my life. Stay safe but enslaved, or risk everything for love and freedom. When the time came to rise for the morning laundry, I knew what my answer would be. I had tasted the possibility of a different life, had felt what it was like to be seen and valued, and loved for who I was, rather than what I could do. Tuesday night couldn't come soon enough. And yet I dreaded its arrival, knowing that it would mark either the beginning of everything I had ever wanted, or the end of the only life I had ever known. The days between Samuel's revelation and Tuesday night passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. I found myself studying Lily's face during our shared meals and work, memorizing the sound of her laugh and the way she hummed while hanging laundry, trying to store up enough memories to last a lifetime of separation. You've been acting mighty strange lately, she observed on Monday morning as we sorted the wash, staring at me like you ain't never seen me before. What's got into you? Just thinking about how precious family is, I replied truthfully, though I couldn't tell her the full reason for my contemplation. How we ought to appreciate the people we love while we have them with us. That's deep thinking for a Monday morning, Lily said with a smile. But I suppose it's true enough. Life's got a way of changing when you least expect it. Her words hit me with painful accuracy. Life was indeed about to change in ways she couldn't imagine, and I was the one who would make it happen by choosing to walk away from everything familiar. I had spent hours considering whether to tell Lily about Samuel's offer, weighing the relief of sharing my burden against the danger of involving her in plans she had already indicated she wouldn't support. In the end, I decided that protecting her from knowledge was kinder than forcing her to choose between supporting me and trying to stop me. Lily, I said as we worked side by side, you know I love you more than anyone in this world. Don't you? Course, I know that, she replied, giving me a puzzled look. Just like you know I love you. Why you talking like you fixing to go somewhere? Just want to make sure you know, I said, turning away so she couldn't see the tears that threatened to spill. Want to make sure you never doubt it, no matter what happens. Ruth, you scaring me with all this talk, Lily said, setting down the shirt she'd been examining. What's got you thinking about love and loss and appreciation? Something happened I should know about. Nothing's happened, I lied, hating the deception, but knowing it was necessary, just feeling grateful for what we have. That's all, but Monday night I lay awake, composing the letter I would leave for Lily, trying to find words that would explain my choice without making her feel abandoned or unloved. The letter went through a dozen versions in my mind before I settled on something that felt both honest and kind. Dearest sister, I wrote in careful script on a piece of paper I had saved from a torn book. By the time you read this, I will be gone, not because I don't love you, but because I love freedom more than safety. Someone has offered me a chance to live as a free woman in the North, and I cannot let such an opportunity pass. Please don't think this choice reflects on you or our life together. The letter continued. You have been the best sister and dearest friend anyone could ask for, but I cannot spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had been brave enough to reach for something better. I will write to you when I can. I promised in the letter, and I will never stop hoping that someday you might choose to join me in freedom. Until then, know that you carry my love with you always, and that leaving you is the hardest thing I have ever done. I signed the letter simply Ruth and folded it carefully, planning to leave it where Lily would find it after I was safely away. Reading it over one final time, I felt both satisfied with its contents and heartbroken by its necessity. Tuesday arrived with crystalline clarity, every moment sharp and vivid as I went through what I knew would be my final day of washing laundry by the James River. The familiar routine felt both precious and unbearable, knowing I would never again kneel by these waters or feel the Virginia sun warming my back as I worked. You mighty quiet today, observed Cook, when I delivered the finished laundry to the big house. Usually you got something cheerful to say. Today you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Just tired, I replied, though I was actually more awake and alert than I had been in months, every nerve singing with anticipation and fear. Well, get some rest tonight, Cook advised kindly. Can't have our best laundress wearing herself out. Best laundress, the praise would have meant something to me a week ago. Now it felt like an epitaph for a life I was about to leave behind. By tomorrow morning someone else would be washing the Whitmore family's clothes, and I would be either dead or free. Evening came with agonizing slowness. I shared what I knew would be my last supper with Lily, a simple meal of cornbread and beans that tasted like sawdust in my mouth. She chattered about her day and her plans for the next week, unconscious that she was talking to a sister who would be gone by morning. Ruth, you ain't eating, she observed. You feeling poorly again? Just not very hungry, I replied, forcing myself to take a few bites so she wouldn't worry. Maybe you should see if Master Whitmore will let you rest tomorrow, Lily suggested. You've been working awful hard lately. Maybe, I agreed, knowing that by tomorrow the question of my work schedule would be irrelevant. After supper, I made my preparations with the methodical care of someone arranging her own funeral. I packed my few belongings into a small cloth bundle, including the dress I had worn to my mother's funeral, the only book I owned, and Samuel's carved button. The letter for Lily went under her pillow where she would find it when she woke. I also left my few coins and the silver thimble that had belonged to our mother, small gifts that might provide some comfort when she discovered my absence. Good night, sister, I whispered as Lily settled into sleep. Sweet dreams, and remember that I love you always. Night, Ruth, she murmured drowsily. See you in the morning. In the morning, I thought with a pang that nearly broke my resolve. But not the way you expect. I waited until Lily's breathing deepened into the rhythm of true sleep before I crept from our shared bed and gathered my bundle, moving through the cabin with the silence of someone who had practiced such movements in her mind dozens of times. The walk to Miller's Crossroads took longer than I had anticipated. The darkness was complete and the path unfamiliar. I had to feel my way carefully to avoid stumbling or making noise that might alert the plantation's watchdogs. Miller's Crossroads was nothing more than the intersection of two dirt roads, marked by a weathered signpost that pointed toward Richmond in one direction and Charlottesville in the other. I arrived early and settled behind a large pine tree to wait, my heart hammering with anxiety. Miss Ruth, came Samuel's familiar voice from the darkness. I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted, emerging from my hiding place. But I decided that some chances only come once in a lifetime. The wagon's coming, Samuel said, pointing down the road where a faint rumble indicated approaching wheels. Driver's name is Jonas. He's a good man who's helped dozens of people reach freedom. The wagon that rolled into view was larger than I had expected, loaded with grain sacks that would provide perfect concealment for a person small enough to squeeze between them. The driver was a grizzled white man who looked like any of the farmers who brought produce to Richmond markets. The passenger, Jonas asked, looking me over with experienced eyes. She understand what she's getting into. I understand, I said, firmly, and I'm ready. Good, Jonas replied, because once we start moving, there's no changing your mind, no turning back, until we reach the first safe house in Maryland, a state I had never seen, the first stop on a journey that would take me further from home than I had ever imagined possible. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Before you go, Samuel said, taking my hand, I want you to have this. He pressed a small object into my palm, and by touch I could tell it was a ring, simple but solid, the kind of thing a man might give to a woman he intended to marry. Samuel, I whispered. I can't. You can, if you love me, he replied. Wear it as a promise that I'll find you in the north, that what we're starting tonight won't end with your leaving. I do love you, I said, the words coming easier than I had expected. I love you enough to leave everything I've ever known for the chance to build a life with you. Then wear my ring, Samuel said, slipping it onto my finger. And know that wherever this journey takes you, you're already promised to someone who sees your worth. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for my hand. I held it up to catch the faint starlight and felt a surge of hope that was stronger than my fear. Time to go, Jonas said quietly. Sun'll be up in a few hours and we need to be well away from here before anyone notices our passenger is missing. Samuel helped me climb into the wagon and showed me how to nestle between the grain sacks where I would be invisible from casual observation. The space was tight but bearable, and the sacks would muffle any sound I might make during the journey. Remember, Samuel whispered as Jonas prepared to depart. I'll find you, no matter how long it takes or how far you travel. Find you and we'll be married properly. I'll be waiting, I promised, though my voice was muffled by the grain sacks. I'll be waiting and dreaming of the life we're going to build together. The wagon lurched into motion with a creak of wheels and harness, carrying me away from Riverside Plantation and toward a future I couldn't imagine. As the familiar sounds of home faded behind us, I clutched Samuel's ring and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the courage to choose love over safety, freedom over familiarity. Thank you, I whispered to whatever powers had brought Samuel into my life. Thank you for showing me that freedom really does await those brave enough to reach for it. The journey north had begun, and with it a new chapter of my life that would be written in my own hand rather than dictated by someone else's ownership. I was Ruth, the free woman now. Ruth the beloved, Ruth who had chosen to wash her last load of laundry in the James River and walk toward a destiny that shimmered with promise. The journey north passed in a haze of cramped discomfort and mounting excitement. 3 days hidden beneath grain sacks while Jonas guided his wagon through back roads and byways known only to those who made their living moving precious cargo toward freedom. Each mile took me further from everything familiar and closer to a life I could barely imagine. The first safe house was a modest farmstead in Maryland run by a Quaker family named Morrison. They welcomed me with the calm efficiency of people who had performed such rescues dozens of times, providing a warm bath, clean clothes, and the first solid meal I had eaten since leaving Virginia. "It is safe here," Mrs. Morrison said in the gentle manner of her people. "Rest and regain thy strength. For the journey ahead requires courage and endurance in equal measure." Safe. The word felt foreign on my tongue after a lifetime of understanding that safety was temporary and conditional, dependent on the whims of people who owned me rather than any inherent right to security. But sitting in the Morrisons' kitchen wearing a dress that belonged to me rather than being loaned by a master, I began to believe that safety might actually be possible. "How much further?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "To more stops before they reaches Pennsylvania," Mr. Morrison replied, consulting a worn map spread across the kitchen table. "Perhaps 10 days, if the weather holds and no complications arise." 10 days, 2 more stops, and then I would be in a free state where no one could legally claim ownership of my body or my labor. The prospect filled me with such joy that I could barely contain myself. "What happens when I reach Pennsylvania?" I asked. "Where will I live? What kind of work will I do?" "There are communities of free blacks in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh," Mrs. Morrison explained, "people who have made the same journey the is making, who understand the challenges of building a new life from nothing, and there are employment opportunities." Her husband added, "Domestic work, seamstressing, teaching, if he has the education, honest labor that allows a person to live with dignity, honest labor that belonged to me, wages that I could keep rather than turn over to a master, the freedom to choose where I lived and how I spent my time." The concepts were so revolutionary that they made my head spin. That night, I lay in a real bed with clean sheets and my own pillow, staring at the ceiling and marveling at the silence that surrounded me. No overseer's horn to wake me before dawn, no basket of laundry waiting in the darkness, no master's schedule to dictate every moment of my existence. I pulled out the letter I had been writing to Lily during quiet moments of the journey, adding thoughts and observations that I hoped would help her understand my choice. Dearest sister, I wrote by candlelight, I am safe and well, 3 days away from Virginia and surrounded by people who see me as a human being rather than property. I cannot describe the feeling of walking into a room where no one expects me to lower my eyes or step aside. I think of you constantly, the letter continued, and I pray that someday you will find the courage to join me in this new world where Black women can make their own choices, where children grow up free, where love is possible without the constant fear of separation. I am keeping my promise to Samuel, I added, touching his ring which I wore constantly now. He will find me in the north, and we will be married as free people choosing each other rather than as property belonging to different masters. The next morning brought another wagon, another driver, another leg of the journey toward freedom, but this time I rode openly in the passenger seat. My face turned toward the sun without fear of being recognized or recaptured. First time out of Virginia? Asked the driver, a free Black man named Thomas, who operated a shipping business between Baltimore and Philadelphia. First time anywhere, I replied honestly. First time making my own choices about where to go and what to do when I get there. It's a powerful feeling, Thomas agreed. I was born free in Maryland, but I got friends who made the journey you're making. They all say the same thing, that the first breath of free air tastes different from anything they'd ever experienced. He was right. The air did taste different, cleaner somehow, as if the very atmosphere of freedom carried flavors that bondage had trained me not to notice. I breathed deeply and felt my lungs expand with possibilities. What's Philadelphia like? I asked as we traveled through rolling countryside that looked nothing like the flat plantation land of eastern Virginia. Busy, Thomas replied with a laugh. More Black folks than you've probably ever seen in one place. Churches and schools and businesses run by people who look like us. It takes some getting used to if you're accustomed to being the only dark face in a crowd. Churches and schools and businesses run by Black people. The idea was so radical that I struggled to picture it. Where I came from, such institutions were controlled exclusively by whites who allowed limited Black participation under strict supervision. Are there really schools where Black children learn alongside white children? I asked. Some, Thomas confirmed. Not many, and not without opposition. But yes, there are places where color matters less than character, where a child's mind is valued regardless of the shade of their skin. I thought of the children back at Riverside Plantation. Bright minds trapped in a system that offered them no education beyond what was necessary for their assigned labor, and I felt a surge of determination to be part of changing such injustice. The second safe house was a bustling inn run by a German immigrant family who spoke broken English but communicated perfectly through gestures of kindness and welcome. They fed me better than I had eaten since my mother's cooking, and sent me on my way with a bundle of food that would sustain me for days. You go to freedom, the innkeeper's wife said in her heavily accented English. You make good life. Yes, you show worlds that all people deserve respect. Her words stayed with me as the final leg of my journey began. I was not just seeking personal freedom but carrying the hopes of everyone who dreamed of a world where human dignity was not determined by accident of birth or color of skin. Pennsylvania announced itself with a sign that made my heart race. Welcome to the Keystone State, it read, and below that in smaller letters, founded on principles of liberty and equality. Liberty and equality. Words I had heard in whispered conversations and secret prayers, but never seen displayed so boldly, so publicly, so proudly. I wept when I read them, overwhelmed by the reality that I had actually reached a place where such ideals were more than just dreams. Philadelphia was everything Thomas had promised, and more. A bustling city where Black faces were common sights on busy streets, where I saw a well-dressed Negro, women shopping in markets with the confidence of customers rather than the deference of servants. The boarding house where I was taken catered specifically to newly arrived refugees from slavery, providing temporary shelter while people found work and permanent lodging. It was run by Mrs. Sarah Johnson, a formidable woman who had escaped from Georgia 20 years earlier and dedicated her life to helping others make the same transition. Welcome to freedom, child, she said when I arrived, travel-worn and overwhelmed. You made it this far, which means you got the strength to make it the rest of the way, I repeated, confused to becoming the person you were always meant to be. Mrs. Johnson explained with a knowing smile, escaping slavery is just the first step. Building a free life is the work of years. She was right. I discovered over the following weeks that legal freedom was very different from practical freedom, that knowing how to be a free person required learning skills that slavery had never taught me. You can read and write, Mrs. Johnson observed. After testing my abilities, that puts you ahead of most folks who come through here. But you'll need to learn about wages and rent and how to manage money that belongs to you, money that belonged to me. The concept still felt foreign even after I found work as a seamstress in a shop owned by a woman who valued skill over skin color. My first week's wages felt like a miracle, coins that I had earned through my own labor and could spend according to my own priorities. I sent part of my first wages to Samuel through the network that had brought me north, along with a letter giving him my address and my news about life in Philadelphia. Within a month, I received his reply, written in the careful script of someone who had taught himself to read. My dearest Ruth, his letter began, your words fill my heart with joy and pride. Knowing that you are safe and building a new life gives me strength to continue the work of helping others find their freedom. I am making arrangements to visit Philadelphia next month, he continued. Legitimate business that will allow me to court you properly, in surroundings where our love is not forbidden by law, wear my ring with pride, he concluded, and know that every day brings us closer to the wedding that will make us husband and wife before God and man. His visit was everything I had dreamed and more. 10 days of walking through Philadelphia as an openly courting couple, attending church together, sharing meals without fear of discovery or punishment, being introduced to his friends as my intended bride, Ruth, rather than as property or secret. Lover, will you marry me? He asked formally on our last evening together, kneeling in Mrs. Johnson's parlor with a proper ring to replace the simple band he had given me in darkness. Yes, I said, without hesitation, yes. 1,000 times, yes. Our wedding took place 2 months later in Mother Bethel AIM Church, the oldest African Methodist Episcopal church in America. I wore a dress I had sewn myself from fabric I had purchased, with wages I had earned, and I walked down the aisle as a free woman choosing to marry a free man. Do you, Ruth Williams, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The minister asked. I do, I replied, my voice strong and clear. I take him as my equal partner, my chosen companion, my beloved friend. Do you, Samuel Davis, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Samuel replied, his eyes shining with tears of joy. I take her as my equal partner, my chosen companion, my beloved friend by the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The minister declared, I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. The kiss that sealed our marriage was sweet with the taste of freedom, surrounded by friends who had chosen to be there rather than being commanded to attend, celebrated with music and food that we had provided rather than being granted by a master's generosity. That night, in our own small apartment that we had rented with our combined savings, Samuel and I lay in our marriage bed and marveled at the journey that had brought us together. Do you ever regret it? He asked, leaving your sister, leaving everything familiar sometimes. I admitted honestly, I miss Lily terribly, and I worry about her constantly. But I don't regret choosing freedom, choosing love, choosing the chance to build a life based on our own decisions. And I don't regret the morning I decided to press that letter into your palm, Samuel said, pulling me closer. Best decision I ever made. Watching you become the woman you were always meant to be, the woman I was meant to be. It had taken 23 years and a journey of hundreds of miles to discover her, but Ruth the free woman, Ruth the beloved wife, Ruth who chose her own path and made her own decisions, was finally, fully alive 6 months after our wedding. I received the letter I had been praying for. Lily had found the courage to accept help from the network Samuel and I supported. She was coming north to join us in freedom. Dearest Ruth, her letter said, I have decided that you were right about dreaming being necessary for folks like us. I want to see this world you've described, where Black women can choose their own work and Black children can attend school. I am scared, she admitted, but not as scared as I am of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had been brave enough to follow my sister's example. The day Lily arrived in Philadelphia was one of the happiest of my life, watching her step off the wagon that had carried her to freedom. Seeing her eyes widen as she took in the bustling streets, where black faces moved with confidence and purpose, "Ruth," she whispered as we embraced, "is this real? Are we really here? Are we really free?" "We're really free," I confirmed, tears of joy streaming down my face. "Free to choose our own work, free to learn to read and write, free to build lives that reflect our own dreams rather than someone else's commands, and free to love," Samuel added, joining our reunion. "Free to marry for love rather than convenience. Free to raise children who will never know what it means to be owned." That evening, as the three of us sat in our small apartment sharing a meal and planning Lily's future, I thought about the morning that had changed everything. The moment when Samuel's letter had been pressed into my palm with its promise that "your freedom awaits." Freedom had indeed been waiting. Not just legal freedom from slavery, but the deeper freedom that comes from choosing love over fear, hope over resignation, action over acceptance of injustice. I was Ruth Davis now, wife of Samuel, friend to Lily, member of a community that valued my contributions and respected my choices. And every morning when I woke in my own bed in my own home, I remembered the woman who had washed laundry by the James River and dreamed of something better. That woman's dreams had become my reality. Her courage had made my freedom possible, and her willingness to trust a farmhand's promise had created a life more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. "Your freedom awaits," I whispered to myself each morning, grateful for the truth of those words, and the man who had dared to press them into my palm when freedom seemed impossible had indeed awaited, and I had been brave enough to claim it.